So I'm going to start where we left off and see how far we get.
Okay.
We left off, let's see. Oh, here. We left off in this room talking about the drapery that was off center. And so
Okay.
now we're moving on to kind of a different type of treatment where it's tab tops.
Okay.
And the spacing between the medallions is much bigger than the spacing that the medallions are mounted to the wall at.
Right.
To get the little scoop in between each pleat. So here is the math on this tab top pleat panel. So the little orange squares, that kind of represents the medallions.
Okay.
So we mounted each of those to the wall with 6 inches center to center. So if you put a dot at the center of each square, that's how we're counting the inches, is between the center of each square. There's 4 spaces and they're 6 inches each. So
Okay.
on the fabric, we kind of doubled that. We put 12 inches into the fabric to
Okay.
create that scoop in between. Otherwise, it would just be super flat and boring. So it doesn't have to be double. It could just be 10 inches or 8 inches, but we went for more rather than less. So that means we needed 48 inches because we did 4 spaces at 12 inches. So that equals 48 inches for spacing. And then in each pleat, we used 6 inches of fabric. And since there's 5 pleats, that's 30 inches.
Okay.
So that means if you add it all up with the return and the overlap and the side hems, that means we needed 90 inches of fabric. And this is another wide width fabric. So it's 118.
Okay.
So we were able to railroad it and avoid seams and have the pattern. I think the pattern would have looked good either way, but definitely looks good railroaded. That's the intended design. Anyway.
I have a question.
Yeah,
When you railroaded it, okay, so if you have a print on that 118 width, you were looking at it in that other direction. You know, like you said, it looks good with it railroaded versus doing it the traditional,
Yeah, let's go back. So looking at these panels, we railroaded them. So that means if you have this fabric laying flat on your table, the selvages are at the top and bottom.
correct.
That's why it's considered railroaded, because the selvages are running parallel with the ground.
Gotcha.
If we did not railroad them, the selvages would have been on the sides, like where your side hems would be.
Okay. And when you talk about adding up all your numbers to 90 inches, which is why you could do it, okay, so you would just cut off the excess or whatever you needed so you cut it at 90 inches,
Yes.
like right, and the selvages at the top and the bottom.
Yeah, when you unroll the bolt, the selvages are parallel with your table when you know, a long way. So we cut it at 90 inches. So the fabric is 118, but then we cut it at 90.
Okay.
So that we still have the 118-inch width, and that's going to be for the length to get our finished length at 90. Which is kind of ironic that our finished length is 90 and we cut 90 inches of fabric. That's where it gets confusing.
That's what I was thinking. And so would you just do your normal formula of adding 20 to your finished length?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we did do a 4-inch header, even though it's a tab top, because it has the pinch pleats, we still did a normal double 4-inch header to get those 2-finger pleats. And then we just made separate tab tops to insert into the top of the pinch pleats and then tacked them in there.
Okay.
Okay. So basically 90 inches of fabric is kind of equivalent to a width and a half. If you were using 54-inch fabric, that's what you would do in this case.
Okay.
And then your labor, though, because it's railroaded, you would still kind of try to figure out how many widths it would be if it was 54. That's how we'd figure labor for fabrics that are being railroaded.
Right.
We just figure out how many regular widths you have. So since these would be equal to 1.5 widths, they would be 2 widths of labor each, because we always round our half widths to whole widths.
Okay.
We're going to get into pricing here too, so that's why I'm starting to talk about that here.
Okay.
Okay, so any more questions on that before I move on?
No, but when you put your tabs in at the top and you're doing a traditional tabling, how
Mhm.
do you have a separate piece on that back part of your header so that
Okay,
you
so we did not put the tab tops in until we were all the way through with the tabling and then fan fold like normal and then pinch your pleat. So
Mm,
it's at that time when the pleats are pinched but not tacked yet.
okay.
So make the two finger pleat and then before you tack it, insert your tabs just into the top.
Are you tacking by hand because it's so thick? Or
This wasn't so thick, so we were able to do it on the tacker.
oh, okay. Okay. All
And
right.
even if it was really, really thick, you could feasibly kind of peel back the two fingers and
Yeah.
tap the tab on one side and then
Uh-huh.
the tab on the other side,
Oh,
and then put them together. And if you can't go through all the layers, just whip stitch them
okay.
so they stay together.
Okay.
Another
Gotcha.
way to go about it.
Okay. Got it.
So here is an example. Just I don't know, I threw this in there because it's a really pretty open weave sheer.
Uh-huh.
It's considered a sheer because of the open squares there.
Uh-huh.
And we put a similarly colored solid behind the pleats just so that you don't see the buckram. We could have put clear buckram in there,
Mhm.
but still you would see that, and I wouldn't like the texture of that in there. So it's just a tip to throw out there of what
That
to do.
solid you're talking about, did
Mhm.
you like iron on white a buckram to the solid and
We basically you can see it through through there. You can see the serging. We serged it onto the buckram,
oh,
just wrapped enough double to make a double turn in there.
okay. Okay.
And
Well,
you
that's
just match your thread and then it kind of disappears. But I can see it now that I'm looking closely.
oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And then so here's how it looks. And this is, sheer panels and sheer functional draperies are so popular. That's kind of another reason why I put it in here
Yeah.
because we're doing so many shears. And I got a really pretty magazine, a veranda magazine too recently, and just
Hmm.
full of shears all over the place. So it's so popular. You really want to know as much as you can about how to handle the wide widths and the fullness with the shear and everything. And in this case, the side panel is kind of a sheer, which, it's a layered look of different kinds of shears, which turned out really pretty.
Yeah.
And then another tip to shear is that when you have this French return, which is also very popular,
Hmm.
could either do what we did, where the pleats are wrapped around the return. To me, that's the prettiest way to do it.
Okay.
But you have to remember to factor in more fabric so you can do that.
Okay.
Or you can just run your return flat, back towards the wall like normal
Yeah.
if you have to. But if you remember to have enough fabric to have a nice full panel and wrap the pleats around the return, this is exactly what it will look like. And
Okay.
that's pretty much like, you know, the way a French return rod is meant to be used.
Okay.
And then here's another example of a wide width fabric where the shear or the stripe is horizontal when you railroad it. Oh, let's see, when you don't railroad it. So
Oh,
mostly wide width stripes are meant to be railroaded so that your stripe will be vertical. But in this case, our finish length was 119, so we could not railroad it.
okay.
So it kind of was a neat look, and this was a bedroom kind of with a nautical theme. So it was really cool to do it horizontally. And
Okay.
um, when we ran the math with the amount of fabric that you get with a wide width, you have to usually order, more than a width per panel when it's something as big as this. The finished width was 120. So even if you figure 2.5 times fullness, which we did, but we ended up using three times fullness because it's kind of a waste if you use if you just do the math. And we could have just done 2.5 times fullness, but we would
Hmm.
have been discarding or not using a whole half a width of the 118-inch fabric.
Hmm.
So basically we did the 120 finished width times 2.5, divide by the 118. We only would have needed 1.5 widths of the wide width fabric. But
Okay.
I don't like to waste it, and I like draperies really full. So we used all 4 widths,
Oh,
two on
wow.
each side of the 118 fabric. And so
Uh-huh.
that's why they ended up so full,
Oh,
and in the stack back, we had room for that. So it was okay. Even though these are cartridge pleats, it was
hmm.
okay. And because normally I would kind of round down just to
Yeah.
avoid a big stack, but it turned out really pretty and they loved it. And it's a guest room, so you want to have, luscious fullness
Yes.
in the guest room.
So on the cartridge plate, you said, because when you stack back cartridge
Yeah,
pleats,
it gets
then it
really
goes
big.
through, stack back, right?
Hmm.
Okay. So it ended up coming out really nice.
Yeah, it did. It did. But I would just warn you that if you don't have the room for the stack back in
Uh-huh.
uh, the view, if the view is more important than the look of the drapery, then you would want to round down and keep it at the 1.5 widths,
Okay.
um, rather than what we did.
Okay.
Then you would have extra fabric for pillows or whatever. But
Yeah.
we rounded up in this case. So sometimes I round down, sometimes I round up. But you want to be careful about doing that in
Okay.
both scenarios.
Okay.
And so so you see where I have this stripe running horizontally and it says salvage and salvage on either side.
Correct.
So that's showing you that we did not railroad it because we left the salvages running perpendicular to the floor.
Correct.
You see that middle orange line, that would be the fold. When they roll up the fabric, they would fold it in half right there and then roll it up.
Uh-huh.
So that's how it looks when you open it up on your table and your salvages are on the sides.
Okay.
And it has the vertical repeat of 14 inches.
All right.
So if we would railroad it, then down here in this little swatch, then the stripes would be vertical. Um,
Oh,
but that's
okay.
why we could not railroad it because our finish length was 117.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
And is that striped stuff a preference? Like, did the customer or the designer want the stripes to be horizontal? Is
she
that also something you?
she didn't specify when she
Okay.
ordered it from me, but whenever there's a stripe and it's a wide width, I always go back to the designer and say, which way do you want your stripes? And in this case, there's only one way we can do it without going to the extra work of adding a false hem or a false header, which we could have done.
Hmm.
But in this case, I said, without, doing anything tricky, your stripes are going to be horizontal. How do you feel about that? She's like, I love it. Let's do it that way.
Oh, okay.
So as long as you run it by the designer or the client, get all the approvals, make sure everybody knows how it's going to end up,
Hmm.
then you're good to go. And if they're like, oh my God, no, it has to be vertical, then we would talk about what to do to fix it. So we would either add a false hem or a false header, and sometimes you have to do both.
Okay. Okay.
And then here is some really pretty
Mm.
5-inch tall Euro pleats
Mm-hmm.
in a sheer fabric that is unlined that goes around a bed,
Oh, wow. Surrounding the bed?
rounding the bed.
Oh,
So here,
wow.
I went through
Oh,
those really fast. So that
beautiful.
this picture is really pretty, and it's kind of just to show you how this room looks with a lot of different sheer fabrics. And like I said, they're really popular, so you're
Uh,
gonna see it more and more. So the
hmm.
Roman shades on the wall are the same fabric as this sheer drapery on the door.
Wow. And they're unlined as well?
The drapes on the door are unlined, but the Roman shades were interfaced first with a fusible interfacing and then lined with a regular lining, not a
Oh,
block. So
okay.
it's the same fabric, but you can see how you get a totally different look.
Yes.
And they needed more privacy with these windows,
Mm, okay.
and they did not over here. So that's why they opted to do them in a different way. But it
Okay.
still looks really cool. And the Roman
Yeah.
shades, they're just glowing. They look really cool. And then the
Yeah.
fabric around the bed is different. So I
Oh,
wanted to show you here. This is a close-up of what that fabric looks like. This
oh,
is the Roman shade fabric, which, um, I, when you get a fabric like this and you're asked to make Roman shades out of it, it's kind of scary because it's so loose and stretchy in
Yeah.
its natural condition. But it does make really pretty drapery. It doesn't stretch as much as you think it will as a drapery, but as a
Mhm.
Roman shade, you want more stability. So that's why um, she already told us she wanted the Roman shades lined, but then I asked her if we could also interface them, and she
Mm.
said yes. So
Oh,
this is how they turned out with the interfacing and the lining.
oh
And
yeah, that's pretty.
we did knife pleats for
Oh,
extra stability, and
okay.
you could see it's a top down, bottom up. So
Oh,
man,
yeah.
they threw everything at us with those top down,
Wow.
bottom up with the open weave, knife, knife pleat, interfaced and lined.
Wow. Wow. That looks intimidating, I will say.
It was really scary, but it turned out really great.
Yeah, it did. It looks really pretty.
All right, you ready to talk about Ripplefold?
Mm, okay.
So this is just a good example, the percentages here. When you talk about the 120 versus 180 and 60%,
Uh-huh.
um, sometimes it's helpful to pull out this kind of a chart when you're talking to a client or a designer who doesn't really understand the differences in the fullnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Because Ripplefold fullness is a little bit different than pinch pleat fullness
Mm-hmm.
because of how it waves back and forth. And this is just a really easy chart to explain. So especially the difference from the 60% to the 120%. This is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a bird's eye view if you're looking, from the ceiling down to where
Right.
the drape is hanging from the rod.
Mm-hmm.
That shows you how much extra fabric is in the 120 inch or 120%
Mm.
fullness. So it really it really takes a ton more fabric to do that than the 60%. But I have kind of made up these little standards in my head for when I use which fullnesses.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly don't go as much as 120% unless it's a sheer and they need a lot of privacy because it's anytime you have a ripple fold with that much fullness, it doesn't hang as well as the 80 or 60% fullness because with that much fabric being waved back and forth, especially if it's really long, the longer it gets, the harder it is to keep all that hanging nice and parallel to the floor.
Yeah.
But for a sheer, a lot of times it's going to hang better than um, a drapery fabric with lining. So
Okay.
that's where I kind of have gone to just in my own mind the rule of anytime I have a drapery that is lined, especially blackout, I'm going to be at 60%.
Mm.
Sometimes
On
80%, I will do 80%, but I will never do 120% on a drapery that has lining. That's just
okay.
way too much fullness. It's not necessary. Uh,
Yeah.
I will do 100% fullness a lot with a sheer and sometimes 120% with a sheer.
Okay.
And then so the chart on the right kind of shows you, I mean, it's definitely a great tool for figuring out how much fabric you need,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't um, use it 100% before I get the rod.
Okay.
I will always ask the designer to send the rod to me so that I can check to see how many carriers are on the rod and what the spacing is on the master carriers. But I will use this to calculate yardage and order the fabric.
So, you always order the hardware first on the Ripplefold stuff, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when somebody wants to do this option and they want to do Ripplefold, but you haven't gotten a sale yet, and and all that, you don't worry about the math portion of all of the carriers and all that until it's a done deal. I mean, when it comes down to like setting up the charges of the cost, that's a separate thing, right? You can give them ahead of time before they give you the go ahead. You know what I'm saying, to figure
Yeah.
out the
Yeah, you
yardage.
you can use this chart to figure out your yardage because you'll have to do that in order to quote the job. So you know how much fabric to price and then how much labor.
Okay.
So that's when I use the chart. And then if I get the job or the designer gets the job, then we order the hardware. And then once the well, and you can order your fabric, but then
Okay.
once the rod is received, that's when you open it up and count your carriers and then cut the fabric. I
Okay.
don't even like to cut the fabric until I have the rod.
Okay. That makes sense.
So here is a little bit of a more close-up
Hmm.
image of the chart. And when at all possible, I go to the butt master rather than the overlap
Right.
because
Right.
it looks better. That's
Yeah.
the only reason. It just looks better. Uh,
Hmm.
Sometimes you might want to do overlap if it's a black outlining and you don't want that little light gap to come through.
Hmm.
But,
Right.
but I really don't like how it looks.
But
So,
it's not too bad. It's not too bad. When they butt when the with the butt master, in a bedroom or something, I know the overlap is to block the light, right?
mhm,
Pretty
yeah,
much. But it just it's just so flat.
yeah,
The overlap
it
is.
kills the look of the Ripplefold because
Correct.
it's flat in the front in the middle.
Right.
So I
Right.
still try to convince people to do the butt master.
Right.
Well, that way the curve is continuous and they meet together like this.
Right.
And
Okay.
sometimes it's not even that much of a light gap that will peek through there.
Hmm.
You have to be careful if somebody's really sensitive to that light gap.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So this is how you use the chart, and I have some examples here. So I'm going to show you. This one is 60% full, and you can see it looks really pretty.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't look skimpy. I think some people think, oh, 60%, that's the lowest fullness, so it's not going to be as pretty, right?
Right.
That to me, when I first started Ripplefold, I was thinking that that would not be as custom or as pretty as 120% fullness.
Right.
So I used to go higher rather than lower, but now that I know how it hangs,
Hmm.
I think 60% fullness is beautiful. So
Right.
this is that example right there. So the finish width on that pair was
Hmm.
108.
Hmm.
So this is how you use the chart. When it's a pair, you have to take your finish width and divide it by two
Right.
to see what each panel needs to measure to fit the rod. So in this
Uh-huh.
case, that's 54. And then you go to the chart where it says 60% fullness, and then
Uh-huh.
go down and find where that 54 falls into that range. So from 50 to 55, 54 is right in the middle there. And then
Hmm.
then you can go over to the left where it says fabric width hemmed in inches. It says 93 and a half.
Hmm.
So that's how much fabric you need, but they're telling you that's already hemmed with the side hems in it. So you have to add in your side hems. So down here,
Oh.
the chart at 54, 60% says 93 and a half of hemmed fabric plus 6 inches for hems. So you actually need 99 and a half widths or
Uh-huh.
inches. So that means you need two widths for each panel. So on my chart, you know, I always have a chart handy. I like to
Hmm.
write down like in Sharpie. Don't forget to add in your side hems right here. And I write
Yes.
it up here and I draw an arrow to this.
Okay.
I wish they would just add that in because
Yeah.
it's so easy to overlook that.
Oh, yeah.
So then if you want to know, because everybody's going to ask, what's the stack back? So then you can go over here on the right side of the chart and it says the stack in inches will be 13 and 7/8.
Ah.
Um, just just because I'm always afraid to be that specific. That's really specific.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes I'll just use my rule of thumb on stack back
Mm-hmm.
where I do the rod 108 divided by 3 is 36, divide by 2 is
Mm-hmm.
18. I would rather tell them it's going to be 18 and then have it be smaller because I don't want to end up being bigger than that. If I'm going to say 13 and 7/8 is going to be your stack back, then they're going to get out a tape measure and say it's more than 7/8, it's 14 inches. So anyway, I
Right.
like to be careful of being very specific on your stack.
Okay.
And then does that all make sense? This is how I use the chart. I just kind of use
Yeah.
it to figure out how many widths I need, and then I know I can figure 4 whisks for that whole pair.
Okay.
And then I can do my labor, and then I would order the fabric and then order the rod. And then once it comes in, then I can cut the fabric and start making it.
Right. Yeah. So you always use the math on the stack when you're figuring out your rod width too. Like even though it's not it is a concrete specific number, but you do your normal rule of thumb,
Yep.
divide by 3 and all that.
Yeah,
So that's how you came up with your rod. Now, obviously, you got to make sure you got the wall space too on both sides because it's only a 71-inch window,
exactly.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So you were able to make that work.
Yep.
Okay. I got it.
Oh yeah, you finished out my notes there. Good job.
I did. I was looking at that, going, okay, because that picture, were you referring to the last picture of being
Yep.
71 wide, right?
Yep.
That one, the slider. So you had enough wall space on both sides to make
Yeah,
it.
you can see I have even more wall space there than what I used.
Okay. So would that stack back clear the glass, or would it just inset to the glass a little bit with your 18-inch rule? You know,
Um,
you come up with,
I think you can see on this left picture, it's not stacked back all the way. If I
uh-huh.
pushed it back all the way, it would have cleared.
Okay.
I just didn't do it for photo
Yeah.
sake.
Yeah, it looks nice.
Yeah. And this is just an exercise room, so um, it, even if they opened it, I don't know if they cared if it stacked all the way off, but
Hmm.
it would have stacked all the way off.
Right.
So here is another example of a ripple fold. This is one we did at 80% fullness.
Hmm.
Um, just because it's a dining room, we wanted a little more fullness.
Oh,
We could
wow.
have done the 60%, but we just went up a little bit more. And it's not a heavy fabric, so I thought, okay, that's fine. And sometimes I'll do that
Hmm.
because 80% is still it still hangs pretty nicely. So in
Right.
this case, it was a pretty big area, and we had to go wall to wall. It's all glass in this case.
Yeah.
Um, the 141, you same thing. You would divide that by 2 in order to
Mhm.
use the chart properly. So your each panel is going to be 70.5. So then you
Okay.
go up to the chart under the 80% fullness category and go to
Okay.
the bottom where it says 69 to 73.
Hmm.
That's where your 70.5 falls in that range. And then go to the left, it says 136 is your fabric hemmed.
Hmm.
So you want to add 6 inches for side hems. That means you need 142 inches of
Hmm.
fabric. And if you divide that by 54, then you need 2.63 widths.
Oh,
And of course, you have to round that up. So for the pair, you're going to need 6 widths total.
okay.
And then, you're not going to use all of the 3 widths on each side. You'll end up cutting a little bit off, but you're not going to do that until you're actually tabling.
Hmm.
That's where, whenever I start doing this, after I receive the rod and count the carriers, before I cut the fabric, I will measure out my snap tape and count the snaps because I know how many carriers are on the rod because I've counted them. And
Hmm.
then I will cut the snap tape and then measure it. And then I know exactly how much fabric I'm going to use. And then I can also plan where the back spaces are going to be and make sure that those land on the seams, the back spaces.
Hmm.
So that's why it's also nice to have more. So, even though the chart says we need 2.63, it's nice to have more than that with the 3 widths so that I can kind of move that tape back and forth to get the seams to land in the back spaces.
Okay.
So I might not start tabling the leading edge right at the selvage. I might move it in so that I
Okay.
can get the back spaces right where I want them.
Okay. Okay.
And then And then likewise, like if this would have said I need 2.4 widths, I could
Hmm.
I could have just figured if that was the case, I could figure 5 widths, which would be 2.5 and 2.5. But that's
Right.
that's cutting it really, really close. And then I wouldn't be able to remove my snap tape and hide my seams as easily. So
Okay.
on Ripplefold, whenever it says I need 2.5 or 3.5 or 1.5, I always go up to a whole width so that I
Mm.
have more play to hide the seams.
Oh, okay.
So that's
Okay.
another, put that in your notes.
Will you, if you have a little more play, does that mean when you get it the way you like it, will you have excess fabric on the back end to cut off? Is that
Yeah.
right? Oh, you want, okay. Okay.
Maybe
That's,
on both sides. Maybe, maybe
mhm,
you don't start the leading edge on the selvage and maybe you don't land the return on the selvage. You
yeah.
might cut off some on both sides.
Oh, okay. Wow.
That's called custom.
Yes, it is.
Playing with
That's
the
interesting.
fabric to get the best result.
Right.
So that's
Right.
why you would order extra fabric so that you can do that.
Wow.
Because
Okay.
if you only have exactly what you need, you're limited to having those seams fall where they are going to fall, which
Hmm.
sometimes would be in a front space, which is bad.
Mm,
You have
yes.
to hide those seams.
That track you have on that wall-to-wall window, what kind of track? Is that a CS track?
That is a Rufino.
A Ruffino.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Black
Okay.
Rufino. It kind of blends in with the black metal frame
Hmm.
of the windows.
So that got installed into the metal, the brackets did
Mhm.
and everything, huh?
Yep, yep.
That looks really good.
That was a
Did you,
little scary.
yeah, did you have to, if it was 141, do you have to take a little deduction in there to
Yeah.
make sure it
Mhm.
fits,
Yeah.
right?
Tiny bit
Oh,
of production, yeah.
what's the rule of thumb? Let's say if it's a ceiling mounted track, what
Mhm.
is the deduction there? There's the half inch, let's say break off the floor. You want a half inch off the floor clearance.
Yep.
And then the thickness of the track is usually like what, 1 1/4?
Well,
You
it
know?
depends which one you order. This is 1 3/4, so you
Oh,
would deduct at least 1 3/4 plus a little bit of
the
space
floor.
because on this kind of track, if it's a ceiling mount, you're going to need ceiling mount brackets, which are going to take up a little space.
Mm-hmm.
Then you want a little bit of breathing room between the rod and the drape to slide.
Okay,
So
right.
overall, you'll probably be taking off, I would say 2 inches for sure,
Okay.
maybe like 2 1/4.
Okay.
No, it
Yeah. I
depends
was
where you would like that to fall on the floor.
right. I was thinking 2 1/8 or 2 1/4
Mhm.
tops or
Yeah,
something. So, okay.
yep. Good
Got
question.
it.
So then this is a 100% fullness. So we're just showing you how each of these fullnesses look. And
Yeah.
in this case, we did a sheer. And so definitely I wouldn't go with the 60 or 80% fullness because it's a sheer. So we did 100% fullness. And the reason we did not do 120 is because this is a really long window, at least the left side. It's kind of a 90-degree corner. And so
Right.
it's wall to wall on that back wall. And that whole panel is a one-way left. So it all stacks on the left side where you can see there's a wall space where it's not glowing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is designed to get the whole thing to stack off the glass. And if we did 120%, it would not stack 100% off the glass.
Okay.
And here is it actually even still stacks into the glass at 100%. You can
Yeah.
see it right there. But
Wow.
it's not very much. So like on the right side picture, you can see how much glass is open. It's quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. You
But
know, I have one question. If you're doing, let's say, a double track of Ripplefold, one in sheer on the near the window, and let's say a complementary one of an actual solid. You
mhm,
know what I'm saying?
mhm.
Would you keep those consistent in the percentages?
Oh, good
66. What's that?
No, no, that's a great question. And the
Oh,
answer is no, not always. Sometimes, but not always. And sometimes I would even do a different pleat because sometimes I might want a pinch pleat in the
oh,
front and a
oh, oh.
ripple fold in the back or vice versa.
Okay,
And with
okay.
ripple fold, you have to remember that the way it S's back and forth, it takes
Mm-hmm.
up quite a bit of space behind and in front of the
Yeah.
rod.
Okay.
So you're going to have a double ripple fold, which we did in this house and some other rooms. The
Okay.
front rod is going to project into the room quite a bit, more than pinch pleat would.
Okay.
Pinch pleat is flat on the back, even though when you open it, it kind of goes to the back, but
Oh,
when you
yeah.
close it, it doesn't.
Mm.
It gets flat on the back. But with ripple fold, it stays est
Mm-hmm.
even when you close it. So it needs more room to clear
Okay.
the back.
Okay.
So good question. And the answer is you can do different fullnesses and you can do different kinds of pleats, even pinch pleat and ripple fold combination, which would be really
Okay.
kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Oh, pardon me, that's my dog.
Yep, that's okay. So here, here, this kind of is one of those situations where it's floor to ceiling.
Okay.
We had to deduct, this is just an architrav Kirsch rod, so it was
Okay.
maybe an inch tall, if that. So we
Uh-huh.
had to deduct that and then deduct the clearance at the floor to get
Okay.
our finishing,
Yes.
which is always nerve-wracking. And then, your floor and your ceilings are not always level, so it might vary from,
Yeah.
one end of the rod to the other.
Right.
So you have to pick a number and go with it. And then here is some motorized Ripplefold. Oh, actually, there's motorized shades behind these Ripplefold. The shears are manual and the
Okay.
shades are motorized.
Oh, wow. Very nice.
So we did a ceiling mount track, and these are one-way draw. And I think she intended to just leave them like that all the time and not even open them.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see when the shades are down, then she has to black out. There is
Right.
some light gap though in the corner.
Hmm.
So if she wanted to cover up that light gap, it would have to be aligned drapery
I
with
see.
blackout lining.
But that's just standard with when it comes to shades. You're always going to have some kind of light coming in, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So
Okay.
here is just wanted to talk about measuring and how to make templates when you need them. This is somebody you recognize down there probably
Oh
making a
yeah.
template on the floor. So if you need to order a curved rod, in this
Mm.
case, you would make a template on the floor in front of
Mm-hmm.
the baseboard, which a lot of people worry that you have to deduct for the baseboard, but you do not. You don't have to
Oh.
do that. You would just mark on the template in Sharpie where you want that rod to end on
Uh-huh.
each side, and mark left and right, and then mark that this is the top and the template was made at the floor, and then
Mm-hmm.
get your measurements up here so you can determine the finish length and all that. But you could even mark where the center is between each window, in case you wanted to do other things like cornices or valances with jabots. You want to know where those are going to land, things like
Hmm.
that. And
Wow.
this is a installer that uses his
Mm.
iPad
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
pictures and puts all of the notes right onto the picture.
Yeah.
And then here's another example. So, if
Oh,
you're measuring with more than paper, you can just do it on your iPad or your phone and take notes right on your screen.
yeah. Do you use butcher paper for templates or something?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
I've seen people use wrapping paper,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is not as strong if it's not the good stuff.
Yeah, right. You got to get
Mhm.
quality wrapping paper to make it work. So,
But make
but
sure, like in this example right here is a really good one because they have all of the measurements. So like in between these two windows, there's 10 inches. Above the top one is 10 inches. To the left, there's 16. To the right, there's 15.
mm,
Um,
wow.
the window is 59 tall on the bottom. There's this small space in between. From the
Mm,
top of this window to the floor. Um, uh, from that top of that window to the floor. And then here he just wrote FC means floor to ceiling is
okay.
approximately 162. So that's from the top of the ceiling to the floor is 162. So this is a good example of getting all of the information you
Uh-huh.
can possibly get.
Right. So on that finished floor to ceiling, if all his little numbers don't add up to that, is
Yeah.
that
Then
what
you
you're,
go with this. Yeah.
then you go with that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
Even though
good.
he says approximately, if this
Yeah.
is something that is going to be installed to the ceiling, you might want to go back. This is good for estimating and quoting, but if it needs to be perfect,
Uh-huh.
you need to go back and get an exact
Okay.
measurement. So
Okay.
by him saying approximate, that saves him for any mistakes
Right.
if it's not
Right.
perfect.
Okay.
So same with up here on this wall. And the reason in this case, a good example of why to take pictures is because you might forget that this wall has tile on the wall. So if you're going to install something to that wall, you have
Hmm.
to make sure you have the tools to drill into tile.
Right.
And, you know, if you're not installing and you're going to have your installer do it, you might want to send these pictures if you're the one that measured it. If you're
Mm-hmm.
the one that measured it, of course he's going to know, but um, all these things are good information for an installer to know and for you to remember all of
Mm-hmm.
those details, because if you're just measuring for like a valance, you might not need all that, but then a client, it happens all the time, will call back and say, oh, I'm going to add a Roman shade to that. So you
Mm.
saved yourself another trip because you have those measurements already.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so pricing. Um, this is not really a lesson on how much to price, rather than a lesson on how to price when you're
Okay.
quoting labor.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I have an example here of how I price a drapery. And just to go back to this, this is an example of my pricing chart on drapery. I have
Okay.
different prices for different kinds of treatments, but on drapery, I have it broken up to different categories according to how long the draperies are.
Okay.
So my lowest category is if they're up to 90 inches in length, which most drapes are longer than that
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. It does happen where we get them at 90. You saw an example earlier, when the ceilings are not very tall. But
Right.
most draperies we make are in this category or this one right here.
Okay.
Once in a while, we do get them, 200 inches long, which we have
Mm-hmm.
coming up.
Mm.
And even sometimes longer than that, which you have to come up with your own pricing after that if
Yeah.
because you're going to want to charge more. That's why we have different categories, because obviously it's going to take a lot longer to make a drapery that's 210 inches than one that's 90 inches.
Okay.
So that's why you want to have these different levels of pricing. And then I also have two categories where it's unlined or lined. And you
Mm-hmm.
even have another category for um, interlined and blackout. But
Okay.
I have upcharges for those things. So I I used to have that here, but I wanted to make it more simple. So I took it off of this part and I added it to my upcharges.
Okay.
It's blackout lined or interlined. I have an upcharge for that. And then I start here and then add on your upcharges like
Oh. Okay.
banding and trim or color blocking and stuff like
Oh.
that. So
So, what a standard lining would that fall in line with your base on your pricing, which you just showed? You
mhm.
know, what I'm saying, where
Yeah,
it's a
if it's
okay.
regular like classic sateen lining,
Yeah.
that would
Mm-hmm.
fall in this category. And
Okay.
so I'm going to move my little heart just to show you. I put a heart over this to cover up the pricing just because this is not what I currently use. And I wouldn't want somebody to say this is current pricing that
Yeah.
everybody should use. So
Right.
that's my disclosure. So, oh, oh, it's not going to let me because I'm in,
Oh, reveal or something,
yeah,
or
I'm in slideshow. So if I come over here, I can move it there. So you see,
oh,
there's
oh,
the
okay.
different prices.
Uh-huh.
So I'll go back to slideshow now. So if it's a drapery that's 122 inches, you're going to go down to the third line. And if it's lined, you go over to the lined category. So that would be 124
Okay.
per width.
Okay.
Okay.
Per week.
So
Gotcha.
on this example right here that I'm going to talk about, the finished length is 124. And we're
Uh-huh.
going to talk about unlined.
Okay.
So if you're back here, if we're finished length 124, under the unlined category, it's 114.
Okay.
And again, this is just example of pricing, this is not what I currently use.
Okay.
Then we go back to this example and we're going to do the pricing and the yardage to figure out how much fabric and how much labor we're going to quote.
Okay.
This is a fabric that's 54 inches. So our finished width is 68. And so we're going to do times 3 because it's just sheer unlined. You want 3 times fullness.
Gotcha.
Okay. So make sure you understand your fullnesses when you're figuring your yardages and quoting the labor, because you don't want to quote a sheer at 2 times fullness, because that would
Okay.
not be beautiful at all. So
Great.
we're doing times 3, and so that's 204. Divide by 54 to figure out how many widths of fabric you need. So
Mm-hmm.
that calculation is 3.77, and you need to round up to a whole number of widths. So that's 4 widths
Mm-hmm.
for the whole pair.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about the whole pair. So then the finished length is 124. Then I like to add 20 inches standard to all my finished lengths to figure yardage. And so the 20 gives you enough for header and hem, which that's
Mm-hmm.
more than you need. But if I'm gonna go with a bigger header, like a 5-inch header, then
Right.
then I'll have enough.
Okay.
And if you want to be exact and just add 8 and 8, that's 16, you could do that. But so many times I add more that this is a streamlined um, way to do it, where I just always add the same amount. So it's faster calculating. Um,
Okay.
and it's better to have more than less anyway. And so a lot of times a designer will forget to tell you if there's a repeat. And so if you're always adding more, sometimes you're gonna get saved by using the 20 rather than 16.
Okay.
So that's kind of side notes there. So
Okay.
each cut is going to be 144, and I need 4 cuts. So 144 times 4 is 576, divide by 36 inches to
Mm-hmm.
figure yards. So we need 16 yards of fabric for this pair
Mm-hmm.
right here. And then we know we need to charge them 4 widths of labor.
Right.
Our unlined labor price is 114 times 4 widths. That means we're going to charge $456 for this pair.
Okay.
And then I have another example down here as if it was a 118-inch fabric.
Right.
So if you're using a wide width, in this case, we could railroad it because we can get the hem and header from that,
Mm-hmm.
just barely eke it out. Uh,
Yeah.
but here's an example to show how to figure that. So again, our finished width is 68 times 3 for fullness,
Uh-huh.
204, then divide that by, just right away, divide that by 36 because you're railroading. You don't need to figure widths.
Okay.
So that means we need 5.66 yards, and I'm going to round that up to 6 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then to figure out how much to charge for labor, you want
Mm-hmm.
to know how many widths that would be if it was 54, just so you can have a conversion to know how many widths to charge for. So then you would take that 6 yards and times it by 36 to get how many inches that is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 216 inches of fabric. Divide by 54 equals 4 widths. So it's the same,
Okay.
but it's not always the same. So you want to do the math. So you're still charging 4 widths of labor. And in this case, I don't know why I went down to 106.
Right. Well, it could be on that chart that
Yeah,
you had.
106. I changed the
Yeah, you
finished
did.
length. Sorry. I
Oh,
did it right. I just forgot.
yes.
The
Yes.
top example is with a finish length of 124, and the bottom example is a finish length of 104, which is why we could railroad in this example.
Correct.
Up here, we would not be able to railroad. So
Yes.
that's why it's 106 because it's a shorter finish length.
Okay.
So your labor on this one would be 424.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
again, this is just my way. If you
Okay.
want to charge, 114, even though it's shorter,
Mm-hmm.
go for it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can make
Absolutely.
up your own rules,
Yes.
definitely.
Well, I hate to have to stop you here. I have
Yeah,
to go to my appointment. I'm so
that's
sorry.
okay. That's okay.
I
We
could
got,
talk all afternoon with you on this stuff.
I know. We actually got pretty far. So, we could
Good.
always finish this up another time.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you were here, and I might even continue on with this just because it's recording. So I can put the rest of this on Patreon, and you can watch it if you want.
Oh, good. And is this something I can also download to transfer? Like I was telling you about printing it out for my
Yep, you already have the full PDF in
a
your email
PDF,
that has all part 1, 2, and 3, which we're doing right now. This is part 3.
and you already sent the PDF on this?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah.
If you don't
Yeah.
find it, let me know. I'll send it again.
Oh, that'd be great. Yes. So keep on talking and recording and stuff.
Okay.
I appreciate you entertaining me for the last hour on this because it's always
Yeah.
so critically good stuff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, like I said, I could talk about this all day, or like you said, I could talk about this all day.
Exactly. So, well, I appreciate it so much. It's always good to see you. I hope you had fun Thanksgiving too.
I did, yes.
Okay.
Thanks
Well,
for
you guys
joining.
have a good one.
Okay, you too. Bye,
All right.
Michelle.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Okay, so we just have a few slides left, so I'm going to keep talking here to myself. And Hannah. Hannah's always learning, so this is good for her. Okay, so here's another example of a center split unlined drapery where the finish width is 84. So this one is a bigger drapery. It's 84 inches wide, and also the finish length is 124. Return is 4, and we want to use a 118-inch fabric. So in this case, we cannot railroad. So if we do our fullness 84 times 3, then we get 254. Then we divide that by 118, where before, when we could railroad, we just divided by 36 to get our yardage. But now we have to figure out how many widths of the 118 we're going to use. So the answer to that is 2.135 widths. And you always have to either round up or round down to figure out how many whole widths to order, because you cannot order a partial width of fabric. So I did the math in both scenarios to show you what it looks like if you round up to 3 widths. Again, you want to add in your hem and header number. So the 124 finish length plus 20 means you need your cuts to be 144. And we rounded up to 3 widths. So that means you need 432 inches of fabric divided by 36 equals 12 yards. So if you're going to round up, which means you're going to have a lot of fullness, because you already figured 3 times fullness, and then you round it up quite a bit. So this would be like maybe almost 4 times fullness, or at least 3.5. But in any case, you're going to use 1.5 widths of fabric. So the 118 is going to be one whole width of the 118, plus half of that will be a 54-inch piece, basically. And so 118 times 1.5 is 177. And this is the math you do to figure out how much labor to charge. So then you divide by 54, that's 3.27. And so whenever you're charging labor, you want to charge whole amounts of labor, not partial. So the 3.27 gets rounded up to 4 labor widths. So that means your labor is going to have 8 widths times $114 per width. So that means it's $912 of labor. So in this scenario, I would probably round down just because it's still going to be very full. Not quite 3 times, but almost 3 times fullness. And again, this is all personal preference, but if you round down to 2 widths, you can see that you're going to save in labor and yardage. So 2 widths of 118-inch fabric, adding in your hems and headers, 144 times 2 means you need 8 yards of fabric rather than 12 yards of fabric. So now that fabrics are, $200 a yard, that's quite a bit of saving right there. And then your 1 width for each panel divided by 54 is 2.185. So that would be 3 widths of labor on each side. So 3 times 2 is 6 times $114 means your labor on this scenario is $684 rather than $912. So it kind of depends on a client's budget, which way you go, but this is kind of some of the math I like to play with when I know what I'm dealing with, who the client is, what they're expecting, and what their budget is. Sometimes you'll round up and sometimes you'll round down. But it's nice to know how to play with the numbers so that you can kind of make decisions and get more jobs. So if anybody has any more examples, now that it's just me and Hannah, if you're watching this recording and you have an example that you want to play with or you want help with, send me an email or a comment and we can play with the numbers and do the math and let me know what your finish width is, your finish length. Sometimes the return matters. And then what the fabric width is, if it's a 54-inch or a 118 or a 122. And then we can help you figure out the math. And if there's a repeat, let me know the vertical repeat, and we'll play with it and see how much fabric you need and then how you would charge for your labor. And then if you have any other questions and want to reach out in these other platforms or email, there's all of the information there. And so we didn't have too much further to go, Michelle. We had one more slide. So we did good. All right, thanks for watching and Merry Christmas, everybody. See you next time.